Silence descends upon the room. Tonight, as we alerted you last week, we will be departing somewhat from our traditional format. Doesn't mean you need to leave your seats or do anything special. Oh, some people will leave their seats. There is a bit of an improvisational nature to tonight. So if we get a technological glitch or, I don't know, someone's pen fails while they're cartooning, just bear with us. Pedagogically, we have been open to different ways of presenting information on approaches to climate change, and tonight is a very good example of that. So having said that, first of all, thank you all for coming on this warm mid-February night, and let me turn this over to my colleague, Rebeka.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, familiar faces, for coming back, and to new folks, welcome, and to folks online, welcome. I am going to jump right into our weekly activity of celebrating our learning community so that we can get moving with all of this experimental and experiential stuff that Ted has been alluding to. One of the themes of this course is that we envision ourselves as building a global learning community so that we can be turning information and knowledge into action. And so, as we always do at the start of the class, please find someone near you, maybe who you don't know or who you just like to connect to, and introduce yourselves to each other and strengthen those bonds, because they're actually going to be used tonight. We are going to be taking action as a community. So let's take a couple minutes to just do that and say hello to each other. Thank you so much for doing that. And to our online audience that doesn't get to shake hands with anybody here, we are thinking of you. I hope, or I imagine by now, for those of you who've been here for a while or who've looked at the structure of the course, the notion that we are trying to teach about climate change from a systems perspective that shows there's a lot going on. And a lot to wrap our heads around. And really, the big idea is that climate change is everything change. And we've also learned that we know a lot about what we can be doing. We have a lot of tools at our disposal. We have a lot of information at our disposal. And we have a lot of passionate, committed people at our disposal. And yet we are not taking the kind of action that we need to as quickly as possible. And that's going to take commitment, it's going to take courage, and it's going to take creativity. And that's what tonight is about. We need to figure out how to help folks wrap their heads and their hearts around the enormity of climate change. And one of the ways we'd like to imagine doing that is through art, specifically through cartoons. And so that's the point of tonight. We are going to be doing this as an experiment, and my friend Pablo Suarez will explain what that entails in a little bit. But the teacher in me wants to explain enough so that you're all feeling comfortable about what we're doing. And so there are, I will tell you, a lot of moving parts and a lot of us asking you to take a leap of faith with you while we figure this out, because we have world-renowned artists whose images I'm sure you would recognize from the New Yorker and other publications, watching us right now. So hello, artists, and thank you for being out there. They're watching from their studios or their kitchen tables or wherever it is that they feel most creative. And over the course of the evening, they will be trying to capture some of the ideas from tonight. And we're all going to get to provide feedback on that so that they can revise their cartoons and hopefully publish them in steps that Pablo will illuminate for us as the evening goes on. When I do experimental and experiential learning in the classroom, I always tell my students that I am here as a facilitator, not as an expert. And that's really the case tonight. We are about facilitating a co-design and collaborative learning experience. So I can't guarantee the results. None of us can guarantee the results. But what we can set our expectations to is that hopefully the process and the learning will be meaningful to you, even if we don't have a Pulitzer Prize winning cartoon come out of the evening. Are there Pulitzers for cartoons? Whatever the prestigious awards for cartoons are, we don't aspire to that. We aspire to learn together, to have an interesting process, and maybe some of the stuff that we will learn can translate into other ways of figuring out how we can communicate about all aspects of climate change in ways that helps people break through their fear or their apathy or whatever else it is that's keeping us from building the massive movement that we really need to make a difference. So thank you in advance for helping us figure this out. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. John Coley is my colleague from the psychology department here, and he's going to help us start thinking about why it's so hard to wrap our heads around this, right, and how we think about it. So thank you, all of our speakers. And John, I'm going to hand this to you.
Thank you so much, Rebeka. I'm very excited to be here talking to all of you today. I'm very excited to be up here with Eva and Pablo. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm kind of excited to find out. I'm also not used to microphones, so bear with me. So what I want to talk about today is how people understand the world and with the implications of how people understand the world or how we understand and act on climate change. And the kind of understanding I'm going to talk about, I'll get to in a moment, but it's something that we call human exceptionalism. And I want to emphasize this is work done with my colleague, Nicole Betts. She's actually done most of the work. I just kind of get out of her way. So I think we will all agree strongly that there is a global climate crisis. These are just a sample of cataclysmic events that happened during a 2-week period in June. And things continue to happen on a weekly, if not a daily basis. What people know about climate change and what people understand about climate change has real-world consequences. So we have good evidence that people who are more knowledgeable about climate change are more concerned. They're more likely to engage in mitigating actions and behaviors, and they're more likely to prepare personally for risks that are associated with climate change. We also know that there are a number of threats to people's understanding of climate change. One of those threats is the news and media. Another is political figures and political ideologies that may not be in favor of people's understanding of it, global climate change. The one I want to talk about, it's one of my bandmates' ringtones, so I kind of like, oh, is that Eric? The one I want to talk about is one you're probably not thinking about, and that's intuitive patterns of thinking. So one of the barriers to understanding climate change, I'm going to argue, is sort of our natural cognitive proclivities to think about the world in particular ways. So paleontologists believe that we as a species have been around for about 250,000 years. During that time, for the vast majority of that time, we have depended intimately on our ability to think about and understand and reason about and predict the behavior of plants and animals around us. So we have had to develop an extensive intuitive biology system. Science started studying biology, and if we want to be generous, we can trace it back to Aristotle about 2,300 years ago. So what that means is that the vast majority of the time that we've been thinking about the world around us, we've been thinking intuitively about the world around us. It's only very recently that we've kind of brought the lens of science to help understand. And the same is true today. So children, a lot of research suggests that children, through interactions with the world, develop fairly sophisticated ways of understanding what's going on in a number of domains, in terms of people's behavior, in terms of the physical world, in terms of the biological world, and that these systems of understanding are in place by the time they start formal education. So children are building these intuitive representations of the world from very early on. In my lab, we refer to these ways of thinking as cognitive construals, sort of particular ways of understanding the world, specific shortcuts or biases, if you will. So these are pervasive frameworks of thinking, and we use them to predict and explain the world around us. I'll give you an example in a second. They're often useful, and they're often correct. So if our intuitive cognitive systems didn't work very well, we probably wouldn't be around, or we wouldn't have them. So almost all the time, they're quite useful. But they can also lead to systematic misconceptions, especially when they sort of bump up against modern scientific knowledge, or things that are bigger than we're used to thinking about. And one reason that happens is that people fill in the gaps in their understanding of the world with their intuitive guesses, because that's what our intuitive systems are designed to do. Here's an example. Say you have an extraordinarily gifted professor teaching about some arcane subject, and you have an adoring student who is trying to understand that arcane subject. Unfortunately, she doesn't just directly take on board what the professor is saying. What the professor is saying is filtered through her intuitive understanding of the world. And what that can often lead to are misconceptions. And by misconceptions, I don't just mean errors of fact. I mean systematic misunderstandings that grow out of these coherent intuitive systems we have. Here's a more concrete example. One of these cognitive construals is that we love to form categories. We love to categorize things. We automatically categorize things. And we assume that members of the same category are relatively uniform and are relatively different from members of another category. So given that we have that construal in place, if our talented professor is teaching about evolution and trying to explain that members of a species are diverse, and over time, if that diversity leads to differential survival, the characteristics of the species in general will change. And that is filtered through our intuitive assumption that categories numbers are uniform and are similar to each other. What you might end up with is a very common misconception about evolution, which is the moths are gradually changing so that they can blend in with the soot-covered trees in Industrial Revolution England. So what's happening is this fact is being translated through intuitive systems to lead to this misconception. This isn't crazy. It just reflects sort of an incorrect interaction of facts and intuitive systems of thinking. The cognitive construal that I want to focus on today is called human exceptionalism. This is one of many cognitive construals that we study in my lab. And it's the idea that humans are unique or discontinuous from the rest of the natural world. Now, you may say to yourself, That's true in a lot of ways, right? The people listening to this talk presumably are all humans. There are no raccoons. But in other ways, it's really not so true, and it can get us into serious trouble. So one misconception that grows out of human exceptionalism is the idea that humans are the most highly evolved species. There are many others. In my lab, one thing that we do is we study how these intuitive systems of knowledge interact with what people learn about the world. And in one series of projects led by Nicole, we've looked at how intuitive thinking impacts understanding of global climate change. I'm not going to drag you through the experimental details. I'm not going to show you data. That makes me a little nervous, but I'm sure it'll be okay. What I want to do is highlight some of the findings of this body of research. And I also want to emphasize that this is early days. We're at the very beginning of this set of studies. So we're just starting to learn about how people's intuitive understanding interacts with their understanding of climate change. Here's some things that we found. First of all, undergraduate students spontaneously and often recruit exceptionalist thinking about climate change in very predictable ways. So one way they recruit it is that they correctly believe that humans are uniquely responsible for creating the climate crisis we're in right now. Another way they recruit it is that students incorrectly assume that humans will be uniquely able to survive the climate crisis that we're in right now, and that the effects of climate change will be devastating for other species, but will be pretty much okay. So what you notice is that this sort of gives us leverage to change behavior in a positive way. This might be kind of dragging against the idea that people need to take action. We've also learned that exceptionalism has real-world consequences. So people who show more exceptionalist reasoning are also less likely to attribute damages to, or sort of increased storm damages to global climate change. Now, I understand that you can't attribute any particular damage to to climate change, but it's a sense of not understanding what's going on, I think. And also a decrease in willingness to engage in mitigating behaviors. But it turns out that there is some hope. So if you emphasize relationships between humans and climate change, and we did this experimentally in the lab by a very simple manipulation. We asked people to draw concept maps and include things like greenhouse gases, fossil fuels, sea level rise, and melting glaciers. So students would draw a map of how concepts that they're thinking about are interrelated, probably figuring a lot of it out online as they're drawing. And then by looking closely at the sorts of nodes that they included, we saw that a number of things had to do with humans, both in terms of causes, so here you have technology and large corporations, but also in terms of effects. So sea level rise would, oh my gosh, coastal cities would get flooded. So by doing this sort of activity, what we saw was that had an effect on people's exceptionalist thinking. Those who did this concept mapping before answering some items that test exceptionalism were lower in exceptionalism than another group who did the concept map afterwards. So it seems like being forced to think about humans as part of this larger system, as part of this larger web, can reduce the extent to which humans are seen as exceptional. And it also increased the tendency for people to attribute hurricane damage to global climate change. So what I think these results, this is kind of a taste of our results, but what I think they show is that we have an opportunity to intervene here. So one way we might intervene is that news coverage might want to stress impacts on humans, and that humans will be influenced by climate change. So rather than our poster child being a polar bear, we might want it to be a human being. Another way to intervene is in the classroom. Teaching about global climate change could focus on human examples of the impact on human beings to try to bring the lesson home. And concept maps themselves might end up being useful educational tools to show people that we're part of a larger system. We're not apart from the system. And I want to just leave you with one more thought, which is to influence how people think about the world. I would argue that we have to understand how people think about the world. So that's what we're trying to do, is figure out how people's representations might lead us to be able to teach them about what's going on in terms of the climate. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Coley for that speech. That was very interesting and great food for thought. Hello, everyone. My name is Ea Kaso-Collette. I am a member of the Sunrise Movement's Boston Hub, and I am the Climate Impacts Team Lead. I was asked to come here today to talk to you about the 2 grief circles that we held in January, and to talk about how it is important to have, how they're important to the mental and emotional well-being of not just climate activists, but to day-to-day people who live their everyday lives. So before I start talking about climate grief circles, I think we should probably first talk about climate grief. So, climate grief, what is that? So, I'm going to ask everyone to put their context caps on, and, okay, first word, climate. So, climate is something relating to the environment, and grief, it's an emotion, typically negative, most usually. So, climate grief would be sadness related to the environment, which I think is a pretty good technical working definition. Except climate grief is none of that. It's not good, it's not technical, it's certainly not a functional working state to be in, and you'll probably catch a fly from the air with your fingers before you can define it. Climate grief, I think, best describes the mostly negative emotional state we're in, as our climate is in constant out-of-control flux. While it does impact most activists through our everyday work, and the people who work with it closely or not, I think it also impacts most of the people in this room as well. Those feelings of dread when you read the news, maybe you've heard of this before. Massachusetts is heating up faster than the global climate average. Sea water rise is threatening to sink Boston, and coffee production will be 1/4 of its current production by 2040. And I need coffee. But we never talk about it. It just isn't done in today's polite society. Tell me, who is going to say, after talking about how nice the weather it is, or whether it's storming and pouring, yeah, I'm really concerned about climate change. I'm worried that it's going to displace my community, and I really don't want to lose my community and relocate. You'd be such a downer, and no one wants to be a downer. Yet, even though what you said was very important, yet, I mean, shouldn't people care about their communities? Isn't it a communal thing to talk about your communities? Yet, when climate change threatens our communities and our daily lives, we shouldn't talk about it. Instead, these feelings are allowed to build up in people, gnawing and gnawing away at them until they become completely paralyzed and apathetic. Oftentimes, they feel hopeless. But because you aren't talking about these things with other people, you end up feeling really alone and isolated. You feel like maybe you're just not seeing what everyone else is seeing, and maybe it's just all in your head. Oftentimes, if things are in your head, even if they're in everyone else's head, you're not going to do anything about it. You're just going to feel alone and hopeless. That is what living in climate grief feels like. That's what my team, the Climate Impacts team, noticed. We're often bombarded with horrible news regarding the current latest climate catastrophe, and we had really no output to talk about it. Now, no diss to Sunrise Boston. They're great. I'm part of it. You all should be part of it. But they're a little bit too chipper at times. We're always so pumped for our activities and demonstrations. We're pumped to be organizing them. We're super pumped to be solving climate change. And we're absolutely pumped, I'm telling you. However, this does not leave space to talk about the fears and despairs around working with climate change. We wanted a space to talk about these feelings and process them. This is where we came up with the idea of doing grief circles. Now, grief circles are not a new thing. They've been around for ages, whether it's climate related or not. People just wanted a place where they can talk about their emotions, whether it's with friends or strangers. And we wanted to create a place where people were comfortable doing that, so people could talk about how sad they were and feel comfortable to talk about it. Yet again, most people are not comfortable talking about their feelings or how sad they are. And when you suddenly dump them in a place where they have to do that, even if they themselves chose to do it, it's not going to happen. They're not going to talk about it. As a matter of fact, not only will they not talk about it, they will deflect to safe climate topics. You've probably heard this before. Polar bears and melting ice caps, sea turtles and straws, Trump's latest stupid climate policy, the latest research in renewables. These are all safe topics. They're impersonal. You don't have to talk about your feelings. Instead, you can just talk about world news. With this, you can suddenly take the concept of global climate change that happens globally and transpose it approximately 1,000 miles away from you are. Presto, problem solved. You're not part of it anymore. But that's not honest. And we all know that's not honest. It's just putting up the social mask you do in polite society so that you aren't being sad, being a downer. For full disclosure, I'm one of these people. I'm an engineer, so I would absolutely be talking about the latest inventions in solar because I know a whole lot about it, and it's a really safe topic for me. I can keep my feelings, put them in a box, and make sure that they won't hurt anyone else, including myself. That's why I'd be ideally suited to be leading these grief circles, because I hate talking about my feelings. Oftentimes, the people who create these spaces are, as far as I'm concerned, completely abnormal. They will talk on their street about their feelings. They will, at a drop of a hat, talk to complete strangers about how they feel. That is weird. The most depressed and the most overburdened people, I believe, are not the people who wear their hearts on the sleeve types. They're the type who are like, hey, I'm fine, don't worry about it. Hey, let's go get this done types. So how do we create a place that can accommodate these people? And how do we include a populace that doesn't want to talk about climate change? Okay, so I'm going to spoil it for you guys. The answer is community. Community is key. I'm not talking about your geographic. My great-grandfather lived here, and everyone else has lived here ever since communities. I'm talking about communities of emotion, communities of the heart, your family, your friends, your religious organization, places where like-minded people can gather and feel heard. So, how do we build a community? How about we take some time to get to know each other? Let's ask our names, pronouns, and a silly question. A bog standard icebreaker. After that, let's lay down some ground rules about people being at choice. People are free to leave and participate in these grief circles as they please. This is not a school event. It's not a business meeting. this is a gathering and we're all friends here, so we can do whatever we want, right? Well, within reason. And after that, let's sing. Yeah, sing. Now, singing is a really big part of Sunrise Boston's structure, for those of you who are not aware of that. And I believe that singing really brings people together, because when you sing, you suddenly feel a lot closer with the people who you're singing with. And I think by having these breaks, you can be able to connect to the people around you and feel and really see them for being there. So now that we have done some singing, what else would we do at a grief circle? So one of the first questions we ask to people is, why are you here? Everyone answered, including us, the facilitators. And shockingly, unshockingly, most people were there for the exact same reasons, for very similar feelings, even though they didn't realize that at first. People suddenly, seeing that other people were in that room for those reasons, could see themselves in the others and the others in themselves. And suddenly, it didn't feel as lonely anymore. After that, we had some small group questions on a variety of topics using a variety of speaking techniques. And it was hard. People cried, but people were very emotionally vulnerable, and that was wonderful. And after that, we had food. It was great. We took a break where people could just walk around, talk to each other, and really get to know each other over food. And that strangers, complete strangers who did not know each other, would talk to other strangers, and they were bonding. It was just great. And after that, we had the big circle question. Now, as you guys may remember, I mentioned that people like to deflect these type of questions, especially in bigger groups. But in neither of the two grief circles that we held did a single person try to deflect, avoid, or try to be emotionally dishonest about their answers. Everyone was honest because we created that atmosphere where people could speak and feel comfortable with each other. We created an atmosphere of trust. We are going to be hosting more of these grief circles. Keep checking Sunrise Boston's Facebook page for event updates. And my vision is that not only do they become more common and that we host more of them, but that they become something that is done both in the U.S. and the world, a place where people can talk about this, talk about their emotions and process them. Because oftentimes, if you don't process your emotions on a topic, you don't do anything about it, and that includes climate change. Strong negative emotions lead to apathy and paralysis, especially in things that feel outside of your control. Yes, sometimes strong negative emotions may spur people to action, but oftentimes it's short-lived. By just getting an onslaught of negative news, you will burn out. But if you talk about it, things can become more clear. But that is just a stepping stone. My ultimate vision is that a culture of talking about our feelings honestly with each other is normalized, that we will not need grief circles anymore to talk about them, that people feel comfortable talking about their fears, their hopes, their griefs to other people, and that we will not be scared because they're strangers and we have to stand 3 feet apart from them to hide ourselves. That we can say to each other, hey, I'm not feeling confident about this today, and that people will listen. I'm going to leave you all with a quote that we shared during the introduction of our Grief Circle meetings. It is by Julia Pope, who spoke about the climate crisis and the need for climate grief in an article she published on Medium. In many ways, the future of the world depends not on our engineering or technological capacity, but on how we choose to respond to grief, loss, and fear, and how we can sit with those difficult emotions individually and collectively. This is now everyone's work, from the people at the center of loss and physical destruction to those watching from a distance and experiencing other forms of loss. We're training our hearts and our communities to become stronger, more compassionate, and more resilient. This ache in my heart, and maybe yours too, is part of what that training feels like. I hope that we at this open classroom and everywhere else can embark on this training together. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Hello, friends. My name is Pablo Suarez. Let's see if I learn to push buttons here. Yes. My strange accent comes from Argentina, but I've been living in the Boston area for almost 2 decades, and it feels strange to have been working on climate change since the late 90s, which officially qualifies me as a dinosaur of research. This is a very peculiar moment for me emotionally. Thank you for referring, Eva, to this idea of community as community of emotions. I'm a math geek. I'm a facts guy. I'm a mathematical modeler who enjoys using the language of formulas to understand and anticipate change and what to do about it. My comfort zone is numbers, and things have been happening. So I want to start with this cartoon. I see that different timing of laughter happens at different times. There's a mother looking at the TV with a sense of fear, and one of the children says to the other, "Whenever I want my mom to play Fort, I just turn on the news about climate change." It is not surprising that for some who care about those around them and their future, it is very scary to be thinking about climate change. There was a time when I was a full-time scientist, and I became a humanitarian worker about 15 years ago, mostly with the Global Red Cross family. My team is not the American Red Cross, it's the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. You could think of us as a think tank that serves the entire 190-plus countries in understanding and addressing the humanitarian consequences of anything from tomorrow's hurricane to long-term sea level rise. What I'm going to share with you now is building on a session we had at the UN Climate Conference in Madrid about 2 months ago, and this was developed with support from EIT Climate Kick, European Union supported, and colleagues from the Center for Psychosocial Support at the FRC. At that session, we explained to people that they had to expect to participate and that it was going to get very strange, that there could be tears flowing. We've removed the tear-inducing parts from this activity because it's shorter, but maybe some of you feel like crying of joy, that's fine, or other sources, it's okay. We want to call this a safe space. This is a photo of yours truly during my doctoral research years. I knew some stuff, and then this new professor arrives, and he invites me to tag along his research in Southern Africa. And our job was to explain what we knew about the science of rainfall and how things could change, and it was awesome. And he happened to be a paragliding pilot, so I went flying 3,000 feet above the ground with him pulling the strings, and then we landed on a soccer field of a school, and imagine for these school children seeing 2 white dudes falling from the sky, dangling from a piece of cloth. It's a metaphor for what we were doing, which was to explain climate science to people who made a living out of rainfall. One of these years, there was an El Nino brewing, some unusual thing in the Pacific that affects rainfall in this part of Matabele land. And at the end of the workshop, one of the farmers who had asked very intelligent questions approached us and said, "Mr. Pablo, thank you very much for coming to our village to share the science. Now I know that my family is more likely to starve." And you can imagine that was really hurtful, because there's a lot of science that is not being used. So I joined the Red Cross family, and at the time I no longer lived in the home of Maria Cesarina Ottavina Becchini di Bertoncini, also known as La Nonna, my grandma. I grew up in her home, an Italian lady living in Argentina. This is a photo from her 100th birthday. She was born in 1910. Her brother died of the pandemic of 1918. She remembers that very vividly. Her life savings were eroded by stuff happening in Argentina. We're very good at that. She lived to 106, which is unusual, but for those of you, Eva's generation, reaching 100 is not going to be so unusual. What they see is looking scary. Now, my grandma used to say, when I said I wanted to do something unusual or strange or difficult, she'd say, Pablo, quello è difficile come pestar la luna, as hard as stepping on the moon. Imagine Nonna 1910 looking at the moon, or 1920s, 1930s. It's impossible, but humans stepped on the moon before I was born. We are capable of remarkable things. This is a photo from the day I was arriving to the UN climate conference in Paris. Lots of hope. Yay, let's aim for changing the world, etc. I knew enough about the climate system and the political negotiations that I arrived to Paris with a lot of darkness in my soul, thinking, what if this doesn't work? And this is what the sky looked like. This darkness is how it felt. I've been to 16 consecutive UN climate conferences. They last 2 weeks, 200 countries having to agree. You know what? That dark, ominous sky, that's what made me remember the idea of climate grief, this incredible depression, anxiety, ominousness that awaits us. Let me put it this way. If you're informed and you're a sensitive soul who cares about others, your only option is to experience darkness. There is no other possible way. And what do we do with that? It's hard to know what to do. My job is a lot about helping people in fishing communities, in shanty towns, in farming communities, in governments, in UN system, and so on, to understand so that they take informed decisions, such as adaptation to climate change. When you think of adaptation, as we saw from John, change towards being better equipped to deal with your surroundings. The leg of a frog is what we see here from a photo exhibit at one of these UN climate conferences. Perfectly adapted for too much water. Guess what? That is a detail of the photo of the frog that was in the mouth of an otter, some other Polish mammal creature. That adaptation was not enough. When I saw this photo, art can do this to you. I suddenly felt, I recognized my work there. I was helping communities on the edge of survival, trying to be a little more adapted to something that was completely overpowering them. And it's bad. We need much more assertive, ambitious, creative forms of preparing for the future. When I was taking a plane back home from this UN climate conference where I saw this, I reflected on this, and I found myself sobbing in the plane. Now, I'm 200 pounds, over 6 meters 4. This femur doesn't fit in the plane. My sobbing was shaking the entire row. Everyone around me was not understanding what was going on. That's how it felt to me 7 years ago. And now, more and more people are understanding that the science tells us that we're in serious trouble. Many of you must be familiar with this graph. This was from the IPCC report some years back. In gray, you see how it had been, the climate, gradually warming with a few dips when there have been volcanic eruptions that block the sunlight. And the prospects for the future, well, in blue, if we take aggressive action to reduce the problem. In red, if we keep business as usual. And here we are, 2020. 2019, you may remember, was a year full of records. The hottest June ever recorded in the past 130 years. The most destructive storm ever recorded. Guess what? If you look back, sure, the worst in the record. But I read a tweet that really clicked. Said, you're not being kind to this year by saying it was the worst in the past. Look at the other half of the glass. Call it as the coolest year in the next 130 years. Yeah? So you're laughing, because it's a witty statement that makes you recognize how bad it's looking. This past year in Australia may be the most adorable conditions, least favorable given dryness and absence of rainfall for forest fires. Most of us are heading in a direction that is very, very scary. This is temperature anomalies in France. A meteorologist who was looking at the shapes of these scientific curves that show, anomalies and so on, he found a part that looked like the Scream, the painting by Munch. And again, I hear laughter. Of course, you can laugh at the recognition of how to process something that is horrendous, that is atrocious. Yes? We need humor to process very difficult emotions. This is one of the many cartoons from our friends from the group called cartooncollections.com. Many of them have published in the New Yorker magazine and other meccas. And you see a father and a son in a coastal beach house. Someday, son, this will all be yours, and underwater. Well, yes, you could call it humorous, but if you are Eva's generation, this is the first generation that is telling those of us very old, I don't accept that. You don't have the right to mess my future and give me a sea level that is going to be feet higher than it is now. Who do you think you are? What are we doing? And they are taking actions that we found, why, what, how, so, and this other cartoon has the sunrise equivalent from other parts of the world. That emblem is Extinction Rebellion in the T-shirt. People who are protesting are being put in jail for reasons that are going to make all of us miserable, like extreme sea level rise. How are we going to deal with what's going on and what to do about it? This is my dear friend and colleague, Professor Nathan Phillips. The two of us are affiliated with Boston University Frederick S. Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future. It's our job to think about the long term. On a normal day, Nathan looks like a perfectly nice, smart guy, but over the past 2 weeks, he's been going through a hunger strike. You may have heard of him in the news. He was protesting something that connected the global to the local, some gas pumping station that was, I don't know the details, but he was asking for monitoring air quality. And he ended the hunger strike yesterday, successfully getting whoever it was that was refusing. Now there's going to be monitoring air quality in the place. So congratulations, Nathan. Now I know my friend, I visited him, and it's very painful to know that this is the kind of stuff that has to happen for people to feel like they're doing what needs to be done. When I asked him what was going on, why he did it, he said, a feeling of desperation drove me to begin my hunger strike. Yet I've been nourished, sustained, and have even found joy in the kindness and expressions of solidarity of friends and strangers. And I want to highlight that the feeling of desperation, in Spanish, desesperar, esperar, it's to wait. It's no longer being able to wait. How are we going to deal with the assumption that we can just wait and hopefully things will resolve themselves? This is a photo from an earthquake in South Asia. It was shared with us by a colleague from this Red Cross team that deals with psychosocial support. And it tells an amazing story. In addition to people who do search and rescue, first aid, and so on, very quickly they sent the barbers. Why? And forgive me for not knowing the details, but it turns out if I am a survivor and a lot of people died and I hear screaming everywhere and I see the other survivors around me whose hair is all messy and we all look horrible, I feel depressed and I'm less capable of doing what needs to be done. A 2-minute haircut can make me look more orderly. I don't look as orderly as John. Others can look more orderly with a haircut. When everyone looks a little bit more orderly, people feel like more able to go and do what needs to be done and move the rubble, which takes a lot of determination and effort. As was said by my two fellow speakers, emotions matter to guide action. Our colleague Ea Suzanne Akasha shared from her experience, and her experience involves war zones, terrible, terrifying human experiences, that if there's suffering, if there's a level of commotion that is very, very distressing, for early interventions, you need to provide safety, including physical, but other forms of safety, to calm down, to provide self and collective efficacy, connectedness, and hope. Hope is not just, oh, don't worry, everything will be okay. You need to find a genuine reason that people can genuinely believe that the future can be better if certain things happen. And that's where we are now. My friend Peter Hong, at that session in the Young Climate Conference, shared a few very interesting things. He's a neuroscience advocate at Google. He helps bring empathy to the algorithms that help you search stuff when you're Googling stuff. And he told us about the ACC, the insula, a part of our brain that he referred to as the compassion muscle, that helps us notice what's going on with others, resonate with their feelings, and provide help when needed. He also brought us to cosmic levels. Our galaxy is in a collision course with another galaxy. Like, we're all gonna die. We're all going to die. And it's okay. It's inevitable. The question is, how do we live? What he says is pain is a signal that something needs attention. So this emotional pain can be guided in that direction. Danny Shanahan, who almost joined us today, another one of the cartoonists. I love this cartoon because, there's something weird with that sun in the ocean. The sun sets not behind the horizon, but inside the ocean. That can't be good. That's where we are. The oceans are warming at a very, very dangerous pace. And if it's hard to boil a liter of water, imagine heating up the ocean. This is Peter Gabriel. Last night, I was revisiting his music. And for those of you who haven't seen Don't Give Up, the video, or heard the lyrics, pretty much anything now, when heard from the lens of climate change, can tell you something very insightful, especially if you're listening to music by Peter Gabriel. I think I made the text too dark, so I cannot myself read that. But one of the verses says, don't be afraid to cry. We have to acknowledge, as we heard, that that's an important part of what's going on. And I had the fortune, through climate change, to give a talk to an audience that included from Ban Ki-moon and Mary Robinson to Mr. Peter Gabriel. And then I had the fortune of having a conversation with him. And thank you, Peter, for your insights. When he heard me tell the story of my fellow humanitarian workers who are feeling broken because they cannot keep up with the workload, disaster after disaster, youth, are so many researchers who cannot keep up with monitoring what happens with the glaciers, with the corals, with the social science metrics of shantytowns and so on. He said he had been doing some reading, and he's very keen on the idea of repair and care. And he referred me to the ancient art form of kintsugi, Japan, which is to fix pottery. So if something is broken, if you fix it, it's not going to be the same as before. But the process of caring and repairing can give it a new way of being. And this is in a way what the climate grief circles are doing. If we are in a process of brokenness, how can we care for each other so that we are this new thing, but we can still be in a good place and helping each other? I'm going to skip to this last one. We as humanitarians have to give a hand. If someone is sick, we need to give medicine. If someone is homeless, we have to give shelter. If someone is hungry, we have to give food. The hand we need to give, increasingly, is also a hand of an emotional kind. And we do not understand the magnitude of the problem we're confronting in a changing climate. So we are starting a process of understanding this climate grief, eco-anxiety. We prefer to refer to climate darkness, because grief assumes like there was a funeral, an end, and then you the memory dissolves and you move forward. But with climate, it's going to get increasingly worse. It's a growing darkness, and it gives you the idea that you can pursue illumination. So the last button I push for now, our goal is to improve our collective ability to anticipate, diagnose, and provide proper support to anyone who may be in need, including emotional need, harnessing the power of darkness to pursue illumination, just like with Nathan Phillips, the professor who experienced that darkness and wanted to do something good and did something that was useful, pursuing illumination and transformative action. We're going to have more. This was the dark part of my presence. In the second part, with the help of the cartoonists, I hope that we can bring some light. Thank you very much. Rebeka, over to you. Actually, we can...
All right. John and Eva and Ted and Pablo, if you'd like to join me up here. We are going to have a truncated period of Q&A. And then after that, we'll take a little bit of a break. Well, we won't actually take a break. I'm going to keep talking at you. But our panelists are going to be looking at the cartoons that our artists are drawing. And if all goes well, they will be up here. And while they're deciding which ones to share with us, I'll be sharing some information about things we can do to take action and process our feelings on campus. And then we will have an interactive session where you'll be able to provide feedback in real time to the artists. And they'll keep working on these slides based on our co-design process. I'd like to kick things off with something I have been thinking about a lot all semester so far, which is the notion of the necessity of a grand reimagining, that we have to rethink our relationship with the natural world, with our fellow human beings, and with ourselves, how we think about it, how we express our feelings, how we communicate about it. And I would just like each of you, from your perspective, to just comment on what does it mean to reimagine who we are as people in a world that's going to be forever changing for the rest of all of our lives.
I think that's a really important thing to think about. The work that we're doing seems to be really consistent with that, with the idea that we're sort of, many people are coming to the task of understanding what's going on with these preconceived exceptionalist ideas. And what needs to happen, in part, is for us to reimagine, as you said, our relationship with the ecosystems that we depend on, because many of us don't accept that we do depend on them. We feel separate. One thing that I want to point out is that the tendency to think in human exceptionalist terms is a pretty culturally driven tendency. So when we step outside of Western industrialized culture, we don't see much of that. So I've done work with indigenous people in Wisconsin and in Central America, and we don't see those kind of human exceptionalist attitudes. So I think, again, what that suggests is this may not be kind of built into our cognitive architecture, but it might be something that we have learned and that we could unlearn.
So for me, I'm going to talk from a very personal perspective here. With these oncoming changes, I am a perpetual optimist and as well as an engineer. So to me, I see them actually all as opportunities. We have a lot of fundamental flaws in our current system. We have a lot of injustice, class, race, environmental, you name it. We have a lot of injustices. We have a culture that is increasingly becoming more individualized, more work-centric, and less focused on relationships and what makes people happy. And we also have an impending climate crisis, which would be very bad if it were to happen. However, I also believe in the goodness of people, and I also believe that people can rise up and do great things if they believe they can. So I believe that we collectively can change our society for the better in the face of this crisis and rise above it and create new technologies and new ways of being that are more compassionate, they're better. I'm sorry. I believe we can overcome this, and I want everyone, even in the face of grief, to feel hope and not despair about that.
Thanks. One of the things I've been exploring with joy, while also with concern, is how do we go about the process of reimagining? Because we have what we have, and that's what we think about, and that's what we think is possible. My grandma said studying on the moon is impossible, and then someone did. The process of imagining what doesn't exist yet requires us to step outside of our comfort zone. And it turns out that our science, our politics, our legal systems love the comfort zone. Who loves to take us outside of our comfort zone? The creative folks, the artists, the humorists, the dancers, the people who know how to touch a fiber and show the ridiculousness of what is and the possibility that isn't yet, because we haven't tried hard enough. So to me, the discovery of new ways of thinking and new ways of imagining, borrowing from the arts. I failed art in high school, so I understand that there's a there that remains mysterious, but those folks know there's something they know.
Do we have any questions or observations from the audience? We have time for one or two before the panelists get to work checking out these cartoons that are being drawn. I love the idea that they're being drawn right now. I hope they are. If they aren't, do we have some coming in? Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, great. Any questions or thoughts? Yes, we've got two. Oh, hold on just a minute. We'll get you a mic. We'll take, Eva, why don't we take this gentleman first since you're close, and then we'll go up to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It seems like we have an opportunity, an immediate thing with the current political environment that it's very possible that we could have 4 more years of what we're going through right now, which is going very much against what we want for the climate. And I'm wondering, we're talking about the emotion and the groundswell of youth doing something about it, and I'm waiting for that to happen, and I don't see it yet.
We have the answer for you, Eva.
Hello. As a member of the Sunrise Movement, actually, right now we are doing a whole lot of canvassing for candidates across the U.S. So, for example, right now in Massachusetts, we're canvassing for Ed Markey, who is the father of the Green New Deal, to win his re-election campaign against Joe Kennedy, who, on top of having $1 million funding from Exxon, also has a campaign manager who is a Shell corporate executive and is very cozy as a corporate Democrat. On top of that, Sunrise Movement has endorsed Bernie Sanders as the collective whole. We had actually a voting session, and we were canvassing across the U.S. for him. There was multiple canvassing groups to New Hampshire these past few weekends, quite a few in Iowa, and it turns out that the youth vote has actually increased by 33% since midterm elections. So we're actually doing quite a lot, and I would encourage everyone in this room, whether you're youth or whether you are young at heart, to my wording is not great, I apologize, to join these efforts, because a lot of movement is being made. It's just not being reported in the news, and I believe that if we all put our voices together, we can amplify this message of we do not need Trump anymore. We need someone who will fight for us, who will fight for climate change, who will fight against climate change, who will fight for climate justice, and will make this world a better place.
I'd like to add to that this is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day coming up, and all across the country, there will be a lot of actions planned about movement building. I think that getting out the vote is something I see a lot of youth activists doing, but they are incredibly savvy about what movement building entails, what kind of critical mass of people we need to get involved with it, and they also understand the legislative process really well, which I think may shame some of us who identify as older, in terms of understanding what we can actually do to influence policy and things like that. So it is that whole toolkit, and I have seen that up front, that you have a very expansive list of actions and activities that you're involved with.
Indeed. We have some State House shenanigans. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is directed to the first professor. I had a question during your lecture. I'm trying to reformulate it. I think it was a very necessary lecture, and I want to go from that framing and ask. Okay, so we started with the intuitive nature of humans going back hundreds of thousands of years. Then went to Aristotle, and then the teacher-student relationship. But I think I want to question this even more and say, and I think this is also along the line of what you said. Like if you go beyond the Western viewpoint and beyond perhaps even Aristotle, the ideas of connections to the natural world, observation, and these other things already exist, but perhaps have been pushed out or over-rationalized by the Western machinery. So how do you reverse some of that process?
That's a great question. And I think it's, in a way, I think it's the question. So I would agree with you that there are a lot of things about how our lives are organized these days that are almost antithetical to the environments in which we evolved in and were kind of, in a way, designed to be functional in. And I think that's a hugely important and often ignored fact. I don't have easy answers for you, except I don't think you can ever reverse things. I think you need to think about how to move forward in a way that kind of restores a sense of people-to-people community, like Eva was talking about, and Pablo was talking about, but also people-to-environment community, ways of feeling more connected to the natural world around us. So I agree with you that that's what we have to do. And in fact, one project that Brian and I and some colleagues are working on is using art to try to get people to feel more connected to the natural world around them, kind of project movies or videos onto large objects that show small pieces of the natural world around them. We don't know if it's going to work, but it's fun. But so I don't have easy answers, but I think you're putting your finger on exactly what needs to be done, is finding a way forward to increase our connectedness both with each other and with the world around us.
I'd like to add on that to discuss some of the research that we're doing in the Social Impact Lab around how creative pedagogy can disrupt some of these patterns. And we have to talk, my friends. Because what we're finding in our work is that when you intentionally create moments of emotional or intellectual or ethical dissonance in the classroom, and you create a space where you can be having these conversations about what it feels like, and this visceral response to some of the stuff that shakes up our view of the world, it creates an opportunity for us as educators to reframe the conversation and to introduce different practices and values and thought processes that make us better at perceiving complex problems. Because if we're not good at seeing them, we're certainly not going to be good at solving them. And visualization helps do that, and discussion helps do that. So I think there's enormous potential for educators to not be so focused on our expertise and the facts that we're conveying, but thinking about how we teach, to reframe the way our students are thinking about the world and thinking about complexity and the ethics of being involved in these problem-solving processes that affect other people's lives. So there's a lot that we can be doing. And I think maybe we have time for one more question before we have the panel dive into the cartoons. Any more? Are we good? All right, should we just, it is 7:15, so I think that you should Go do your thing, the three of you. What's happening now is that they're going to be looking at the cartoons that have been submitted by the artists who've been watching. And while they're doing that, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of information. It will be familiar to some of you about things we can be doing on campus to address some of the impulse to be sharing more about how we're feeling and to take action. So let me jump ahead to remind students that self-care is a huge part of dealing with this, and it has been a theme that we have been trying to address throughout the semester, because Ted and I felt as educators that if we are going to be provoking these emotions, we really ought to be acknowledging them and providing ways for students to process them. So every Thursday, students are invited to join us at noon in the Office of Undergraduate Research and Fellowships in 450 Dodge Hall, and they are putting on lunches for us where we're processing what's going on. And it's been very exciting to see some ideas and actions coming out of that as well. So we really encourage you to take advantage of that. We also want to make sure that everybody's aware of what health services are available on campus for those of you who are looking for a little bit more personalized support, and we can help you find that information as well. For those of you who are excited to take action, I want to make sure you're aware of an opportunity that we have for students at Northeastern to apply. Actually, students anywhere can apply for this if you're an undergrad, and so if you're watching online, please take note. The Millennium Fellowship is being offered through a collaboration with the Millennium Campus Network and UNAI, the academic initiative at the United Nations. And what this is an opportunity for students working on their own campuses with their own student leaders to receive the only UN-certified undergraduate leadership development certificate in the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's a mouthful. In other words, you'll have a credential that shows you have been paying attention to what it takes to solve problems related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can apply now at this URL, www.millenniumfellows.org. We have been a campus with a cohort for the last 2 years, and we would love to see you do that again next year. That is a program that is associated with the Social Impact Lab. I also want to make sure that you're all aware of the resources that are available to you. Every week we have had, but do you hear that laughing over there? I am so excited to see these cartoons. On the webpage of this course, every topic listed, very soon after we have the panel, starts to get populated with resources that you can use to learn more. And so you can find the videos of classes maybe that you have missed there. You can share those with folks. You can find a whole range of publications, from more popular publications to more scholarly works, data, reports from various global agencies. And so we really want to make sure that you're all taking advantage of that, and that you'll continue to come to the course. Just so you have a sense of where we're going with this, we are deep into the middle section on human impacts. Next week, we're going to have a panel on global development, then immigration and refugees, followed by indigenous peoples. And at that point, we're going to be switching gears to the last third of the course. We're going to be looking at levers of change. And that will include looking at alternative fuels, looking at policy, looking at activism, and ways that we can be telling the narrative of what is happening through journalism in different ways. So that's the arc. We are going to be hopefully ending with helping you see the toolkit that's available to you, so that we're not just leaving you with all of this information and not helping you turn it into action. While they're picking out their cartoons, I just want to explain now what's going to happen next. They are choosing from a wide assortment of cartoons, a few that they feel especially capture what they were trying to say. And so that's why the panelists are up there as well. It's not just Pablo trying to put on a show for us. but they are actually choosing the ones that they think are most connected to the content they provided. And we're going to share those with you, and interspersed with some of the slides, you're going to see a QR code and a URL. And that's going to be the information you need to provide us feedback. And so we want to make sure that everybody here has access either to a smartphone or a Wi-Fi enabled laptop. And so what we're going to do now, while we're getting ready for this, is to ask if there is anybody here who has a smartphone or Wi-Fi enabled laptop who'd be willing to get up and move and sit with somebody who doesn't have one. Can I see students in the audience who, okay, we've got a ton of people willing to do that. So what I'd like to say now is, if you are here and you didn't think to bring your phone or your laptop and you would like to join someone else, this is what our learning community is all about. Let's pair up those who don't have their technology with them with those who do, so that everybody can be a part of the conversation. So if you are here without your tech and would like somebody to come and move and sit close to you, and you can make a new friend tonight, can you just put your hand up high and we'll have folks move around? Or are we such a technologically advanced group that everybody here has either their phone or their laptop with them? All right, well, there's our first learning for the evening, scientists, that in a room of this many people, everybody had access to a phone or laptop. So thank you for those of you who offered to move around, but apparently we don't need that, which is great. For folks who are watching online, if you are watching the live stream in real time, you will be able to give feedback too. So you don't have to be in the room to be providing feedback. This is something that we're trying to get as many people to participate in as possible. So live stream people, go on ahead. Don't put them in the Facebook comments. We're not going to be paying attention to those, or I shouldn't say that. We will pay attention to those, but the artists don't have access to those in real time. They're getting all of these comments in a separate, through a separate channel. What that's going to look like is the QR code will come up on the screen and the URL will be there. And so if you have a smartphone, just train your camera lens on the QR code, and the feedback form will come up on your phone. It's just a Google form. And if you're using your laptop, just type in the URL. It's a bit.ly URL, and it is the bit.ly prefix and then cartoon feedback. I think you'll see it up there. The form itself is pretty simplistic. It's just a series of fields where we're going to ask you to put in your response to whatever question Pablo poses to you. And we didn't number them or anything. I mean, they're numbered, but there aren't questions posed in the form because we didn't know in advance what Pablo was going to ask you. If he can stop laughing long enough for this to work. He's going to tell you what the questions are, and you'll simply put it in the next field on your form. I think this will all make a lot more sense when you actually have the form open in front of you. Are you ready? All right. So I think now what we're going to do, Ava and Abby, are you going to switch us over to they're ready? A couple here, and then we're going to switch over, and you're good with that. All right. Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you for entertaining the troops while we had that very difficult work. Artists, thank you for making our life difficult. We thought that choosing about 10 cartoons for you to give feedback would be easy, because what can they do in real time with this very depressing topic? Well, we couldn't get to the end, and oops, sorry, that way. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Let's see. Hello, yes. So, artists, thank you. We couldn't go through all of them. We want to keep pretty much all of them. So, Cartoonathon. What's a Cartoonathon? Have you heard of a hackathon? A hackathon is like a marathon of hackers. It's a bunch of people who know something like computer code and making apps, and they spend time with experts, and after some time, they make something that is potentially useful. We're doing the same, only instead about hackers and computer code, we're doing it with cartoonists. This was designed for a World Bank team with colleagues from Cartoon Collections, but now we're adapting it with the Northeastern team and my team. And it's an experiment. So thanks for coexisting with our experimental approaches. We look forward to all of us being the rats in this laboratory. What do you think of when you think of humor? What comes to mind? laughter, what else? Irony. These are some of the words that I have heard from people, laughter, jokes, fun, comedy. This is what we tend to think about. Now, it may look like it's a normal day, and in a way it is if you recognize that the new normal looks a lot like what we used to call bad. This is a cartoon by Bob Mankoff, and this explains our work life. Basically, change is often gradual until it is abrupt. And excuse my mathematics, I'm going to deploy some math language on you. H stands for horror. How horrible can it get? D stands for denial. Do we recognize the phenomenal danger in front of us? Question mark is, what the hell were those people thinking? Why do we keep socially constructing risk? The original caption by Bob, we've got to talk. Guess what? Talking about difficult things, depressing things is not easy. Humor can help us. These are the words most of us think of. Does anyone think death when thinking of humor? Because when I asked Bob Mankoff, what do you think of when you think of humor? He looked at me in the eye and said, death. I kid you not. Think of that cartoon. These are the words that cartoonists think of when they think of humor. Incongruity, danger, risk, conflict, ambiguity, contradiction. So as you go through your task, which is coming soon, we want you not to make the cartoon more cute. I mean, you can if you want, but we want you to use the opportunity. You are co-cartoonists now. You're going to create cartoons. Why? Because humor can help us deal with difficult times. There's a fellow on the screen who knew about difficult times. Just pigmentation determined whether you could get on this or that side of the bus and so on. Nonsense. It was nonsense, and he found that humor was useful. You've got to have the ability to engage in creative laughter, he said, to live amid difficulties. He said, develop the talent to get the truth over to many people by laughing the truth into them and out of them, getting people to understand and rise above the despair. Now, he speaks about developing the talent. We are going to develop your talent as humorists. You, the audience, both in person and especially those of you who are somewhere in the internet universe, are going to become activists in the creation of laughter that helps us save the world, also known as Laughtivism. If you don't know this book, I highly recommend it. It's about the nonviolent, peaceful use of humor to do what is good for the world. So these are some of the cartoonists in our teleconference yesterday, along with some of us non-humorists. We have been witnessed by Emily Flake. What do we care about? Yeah, that's what she's helping us reflect with this cartoon. Paul Bisca, we have no funding for disasters that have not yet happened. Guess what? Maybe we have to rethink how we put our money where. Peter Kuper, the caption says, Bernard, nobody likes an I told you so. Ice cream. Yeah. And Rebeka Ryvola, this one, if you know of the Asimov's laws of robotics and of the UN climate process, you would understand why this is so spot on. So thank you, Rebeka, Peter, Emily, and Paul. Your task is going to be to co-create humor by improving the draft cartoons that these guys made in real time. So this is exactly what will happen. We are going to switch from PowerPoint to the other thing that our colleagues have. You're going to examine each draft. We're going to show it. You're going to look at it. You're going to imagine how it could be improved so that it is a better cartoon, more successful at being insightful, humorous, understandable, and also can it be more useful for us to communicate what matters. Now, the goal of the humor that you're going to see is not to make you laugh, is to make you think. If laughter happens as a byproduct, that's fine. Then you're going to submit feedback digitally. I assume that was all explained. Excellent. And then you propose action. But for each cartoon, you're going to look at it, and you're going to write into that thing digital that she explained, how could it be improved? Do you want to add a parrot on the shoulder of the character? Do you want to change the landscape? Do you have a modification for the caption? Whatever. I've been talking too much. Let's move on. Do you want to switch to the other thing?
Okay.
Drum roll.
Drum roll. I'm so excited. The first image that's going to come up, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is actually the QR code and the URL that you're going to need to open up your feedback forms. So we'll just take a minute when those come up to make sure that you're all digitally connected. And once you do that, you'll actually see what I'm talking about in terms of these fields where you can provide your feedback. So here we go. So type in the URL. And I have often found using Bitly's that you actually do have to type the whole thing in, starting with the HTTP. If you have your smartphone, just focus on the square with your lens, and it should pop up. There'll be a prompt at the top of your phone, and if you hit the prompt, it should open you up to the Google form. So let me give you all just a minute to do that. Can I just see thumbs up if you've gotten in? Okay, we have quite a few people who are in, thank goodness. All right, I see a few people still working on it, so we want to make sure that everybody's in the same place. And then there's one more thing to keep in mind. As I said, the questions are just fields, so those are just typing in what you're thinking, what you're feeling. We'll let you know when to move from one field to the next. So the first time Pablo asks you to write something, that will be the field that's marked question 1. The next time he'll say, okay, next field, that will be question 2. And don't be too anxious about making mistakes or anything. This is not a graded exercise for those of you who are taking the course for credit. Don't worry about your performance. We're just hoping that we get most of you moving along at the same pace. One last thing to keep in mind is that the cartoons are actually coded with the artist's initials and a number so that we can keep track of which ones you're responding to. So if you're able to remember that the cartoon you're responding to was, for example, by Emily Flake, that would be EF1 or EF2, refer to that in your code so that the artists can actually see the references to their particular cartoon. I imagine that some of them are going to be so distinctive that they're going to know, of course, I was the one who wrote about the parrot and the pirate or whatever it is, and your answers themselves will be self-explanatory to the artist. So let's just see how this goes.
Sorry, moving on to the next one. You can push buttons accordingly. It says, we, says one creature to the other, must do better at conserving these threatened species. And there's a human in the background. So your question is, how could this draft cartoon by Rebeka Ryvola be more of your liking? Can you type any initial reactions? Because there are so many cartoons, we're going to move at a pace of less than 60 seconds per cartoon. So just be, a thought comes to mind, send it. Feel free to have conversations with your neighbors. How could this be better? Yes?
Yes, RR2.
RR2, correct.
So question 1, you're responding to RR2.
Correct. Question 1, you're responding to RR2. And the question is, how can this be better? In 20 seconds, we move on. And Rebeka, I don't know if you could hear it, if you're hearing, but there was laughter in the room, which is awesome. And moving on to the next one. Psychologist, enough about climate change. Just tell me about your mother. There's the previous one and this one are part of a series by Paul Bisca. Psychologist says, so this Mother Earth complex is bothering you. So for both cartoons, PB2 and PB3, could you improve something? Do you have any advice? That's question 2. And in 20 seconds, we shall move on to the next one. Sorry to make it so speedy. The good news is that you can revisit your questionnaire later. You don't have to submit the answer now.
Oh, that's an important thing to mention, that you're not submitting this until the end of all the questions, and you can go back, yes.
So you can take notes and finish submission later. Moving on to the next one. As I have written many times, this all began with intuitive cognitive construals. Guess what was being said at the time of this cartoon? It was awesome to see presenter John react with a big laughter at this. So this is question 3. Do you have any advice on how this could be used in your world? Whenever you fill in, it's not only about the cartoon itself, but also, do you have ideas on how it could be used? Do you know a psychology teacher who could benefit from it? Let's give you. All right.
Or maybe put it on his website.
So they got your hair right.
And moving on to the next one. This is Emily Flake, EF7. A spoonful of sugar helps the existential panic go down, the existential panic go down. And you can imagine that it keeps going. Note the creative use of the balloon. So this was our question 4, we said. What do you think? And also feel free to just say, I like it, or I don't like it, or I think it's awesome, or I will use it in my refrigerator. And moving on to question 5. You use straws. The other one says, you drive, you eat meat, you buy clothes from child slaves, you watch the Kardashians. And meanwhile, in the background, there's an oil and gas corporation with a mischievous, evil smile, happy about that distraction. This is RR3 is the code, and the question was question 5. What's your thought? Can you share anything interesting about this one? How to make it better, how to use it? And more seconds. And moving on to the next one. Question 6. Looks like catastrophe. Honey, I am now ready to listen. It's interesting, just like the couch and waterfall cartoon, which I'm using about climate change, but it was actually a cartoon about marriage. Here we have the symmetric, the mirror image of that. So, question 6 for Paul Bisca 4, PB4. Do you have any advice? Can it be used? Do you have ideas? 10 more seconds. And moving on to the next one, which will be for question 7. Let me put this in words you'll understand. You're screwed. This is EF1. What feedback, what advice, what use? In 10 seconds, we switch to the next cartoon, and then we'll ask a different kind of question. All right, moving on. This will be question 8. You hear the laughters in the room. Maybe those of you online don't notice, but there was a lot of laughter. Hey, how are you feeling about the climate crisis? PK3. Peter Kuper, thank you very much for making us laugh and think. So what could be changed? How could it be used? So let's leave this cartoon there for now and take advantage of this caption to move on to question 9 without changing the cartoon. For question 9, I want you now to think about how are you feeling about the climate crisis? Now that you're in the middle of this cartoonathon, What's going on in your system, your brain, your heart, your skin? Write something about how it's feeling now, in this moment, in this session. What's going on? We'd like to get a sense of your mental and emotional temperature. Question 9, I am told. The cartoon was question 8, and question 9 is your personal answer if you want. There's no picture, correct. It's a question to you. How are you feeling? People in the audience, same for you. Internet audience, live streaming, how are you feeling? We'll give you another 20 seconds or so. And prepare to either wrap up or finish it later, because we're moving on to the next cartoon, which will be for question 10, also from Peter Kuper. This one has no caption. It's PK4. And we chose it because we found it more intriguing than the rest. Harder to make an obvious meaning of it, which means that there may be multiple meanings. So you could answer an idea for making it better, or you could answer what it means to you. What does it make you think of? Peter Kuper, PK4, question 10. And about 10 more seconds. And moving to the next one. Emily Flake 2, climate grief. And you notice the tears contributing to the rising sea level. What comes to mind? I can tell you my reaction. Thank you, Emily. This one thing that it tells me is that if we obsess on our own suffering, if we cry and talk about our crying and the darkness without channeling that towards the need for illumination, the need for community, the need for transformative action, then the suffering alone makes things worse. So to me, this is certainly, coming to my future seshons when talking about the need to confront the reality of suffering. Yes, acknowledge it, but don't dwell there. Think about learning how to swim, how to reach out to the people in the background where there's more lonely people, possibly also crying. Can we laugh together? So this was question what? 11? So if you had comments for this cartoon and its potential use, question 11. And we move on to 12. Climate change will kill the poor on the planet. There's a person potentially with privilege in a relatively elevated place, while others who are actually the poor on the planet and suffering, they are already underwater. This, I have to say, is a very dominant perspective about those who talk about climate grief. They can be labeled as, oh, you don't know, etc. And I think all suffering deserves to be treated with love and respect, but we have to be aware, as we learned from John, that we have to bear in mind how people think. So this was 12. Any feedback, any advice? RR1. We move on to 13. The end is near, says a person that looks like a religious communicator, and then someone else who looks more like a scientist possibly says, he's right, actually. EF4. Do you have any advice? Is there anything you think could be done? And by anything, it could be as simple as the choice of colors or notice the toes in the one on the left. There's details, and maybe there are details that are not there that you'd like to propose. What number was this one again for the question? This is question 13. So we're going to change the pace after the next one. We move on to the next one, which will be question 14. This has to be in reaction to Peter Hong being the neuroscience advisor or something like that, advocate at Google. What do you think? I need to run him through the empathy algorithm. RR4, do you have advice, insights, questions? And this was question 14, correct? So question 14, finish your feedback. We will not advance because for question 15, we're going to ask you the following. Can you name one instance where humor, cartoon or otherwise, including someone near you making a funny remark, enabled empathy to happen? Can you talk about the connection between humor and empathy out of your own experience or the experience of those near you? Do you remember an instance where laughter led to bonding? Question 15. Connection between humor and empathy. Did something ever happen that made you laugh and as a result feel empathy? And moving on to the next cartoon, also by Emily Flake, EF5, global average surface temperature change. It's the graph you saw, only there is a human facing what looks like a precipice. And this was 16, correct? Question 16. What comes to mind about this cartoon? What do you like? What would you change? How could it be used? This is question number 16. Five more seconds. Do not advance yet, please. And for the next question, question 17, we're going to ask you the following. You have seen a lot of new cartoons since the Cartoonathon started. Name 2 or 3 that come to mind. I remember the one with the, I don't know, I'm not going to give any words so I don't refresh your memory. Name, in question 17, 1 or 2, at most 3 cartoons that come to mind of the ones you saw so far. Either because they make you laugh, they made you think, they made you notice.
And you don't need to necessarily remember the code.
Yeah, you can just say the one with the thing. Yes, from this latest, not from my talk, correct, only from the new ones. The ones that were created in real time. Okay, it turns out we're running out of space to ask questions. We didn't know we had so many interesting possibilities with cartoons. So this is a testament to our artists that you surprised us with your ability to deliver tailor-made, intelligent, often laughter-inducing, always thought-inducing or thought-provoking cartoons. We're going to show one more cartoon. By the way, you may not know that in the New Yorker magazine, when an artist gets a contract, or at least in the past, the contract does not refer to cartoons, it refers to idea drawings. It's a drawing that makes you think. So this is for question 18. Everything's fine, just fine. Of course, why wouldn't it be? Really remembering Eva's conversation. So this is EF3. This is our last cartoon of the batch. What advice do you have for the cartoonist, or do you have any thoughts about how it could be used or useful? And leave it in this one. For the next question, question 19, we would love to hear your feedback about this experiment. We just went through, as far as I know, the first ever climate change cartoonathon live streamed with direct engagement of the audience. So congratulations to you all for having survived so far this experiment. I am sure that there are a million ways to make this activity better. Should we propose that Pablo doesn't talk too much? Should we invite the technology to be different? Should we advise the cartoonists to do more, less, different, etc.? What advice do you have about the design, facilitation, and implementation of this cartoonathon experience? Let's give you a couple of comfortable minutes. Any advice on how this could have been better for you? This is question 19. How could this thing be better? This cartoonathon. You have about half a minute left for your feedback on all of this. And we will have only one question left. So I will ask all of you in person and from the live streaming community to, first of all, notice where you're sitting or standing. Make sure your spine is as straight as can be. Stretch, move your fingers, breathe in. Exhale if you want. Give it one more try. Remember you're breathing, you're alive. What a privilege. Be grateful. And now question 20. Say whatever you want, my friends. Anything. You can rant about the universe, you can say something about how it is going now in your toes, whatever. Ideally something that others would benefit from reading. Free literature moment for you. You have a couple of minutes. and start wrapping up. It is now 54 minutes past the hour. We have to end very promptly at 00, and we have the opportunity to hear some closing remarks from our fellow panelists. So please, you can finish the last touches of your questions 1 to 20 if you want, but please click send. Submit. Thank you. Do not let the computer go dark, the screen go dark without hitting submit, otherwise all your work will have been in vain. So we're going to invite fellow panelists to share some reflections, then Rebeka will lead us through a moment of reflection, and then we'll be done. On my behalf and on behalf of the creators behind this thing, thank you so much, participants from the distance and here, for your tolerance and for your enthusiasm and your ideas. Thank you, Northeastern University, especially Ted and Rebeka and Abby and so on, for making this possible. Awesome, we survived. Thank you.
I just want to I just need a microphone. There we go. I just want to share a quick observation that I was privileged to have that you guys didn't get to have. And what that is I got to see these, and this is, I'm speaking to the artists maybe in particular. I got to see these drawings on the small computer screen. And then I went out into the audience and I got to see them projected on this huge, giant screen. And they were so moving. They were so much more striking and moving to me when I saw these giant cartoons than when I saw them on a small screen. And I was really deeply moved by the experience of seeing them so large and in such detail. And I just wanted to share that with you, and I wanted to share it with the artists. Thank you so much.
I'd like to echo what my fellow panelists said. This was a great experience. Thank you to the cartoonists for taking the time and the effort to do this, and also thank you to Sunrise Boston for connecting me with Rebeka and giving me the chance to speak. I encourage all of you to carry this experience with you moving forward, and to think of thoughtful ways to talk about climate change and express your feelings and thoughts and actions about it. I encourage you to get politically active. As Rebeka mentioned, there's the Sunrise Northeastern Hub. There's also the Sunrise Boston Hub. The hunger strike that Pablo mentioned actually is over the Weymouth compressor station, which is actually an ongoing project to move essentially coal fuel. The coal is compressed in Massachusetts, and then the energy is supposed to be moved up to Canada, even though Canada doesn't want to be part of it. There's been some illegal things going on, like digging up of asbestos and lack of testing and lead pollution and whatnot. So if you want to do something about that, please join FRACS, FRRACS, which is a community around Weymouth trying to stop that. But I'd like to thank you all again so much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Pablo, Eva, John, Ava and Abby, Emily, Paul, Peter, Rebeka, thank you so much. Deep breath. In the spirit of being honest, I'm going to admit I'm having trouble not crying right now. And to be really honest, it's because I'm so relieved that that worked. We were pulling this together right up until the last minute because it truly was experimental. Thank you, my friend, for giving us the opportunity to do that, and to all of you for participating and taking that leap of faith. So relief. Sadness. I'm a mom. I work with young people. This is real. And joy. Because working with the people who care and joining in community with them makes it possible for us to keep moving through the grief. And so relief, sadness, joy shows that we as humans can hold contradictory feelings and ideas in our hearts and minds. And that's what it's going to take. And so yes, humor and grief and everything else is part of it. And so as we always do, even though you have been reflecting a lot, I'm going to ask you to do it one more time. And we're going to do a moment of reflection to think about what we want to learn more about this week and what we want to do with this experience we've had, how we're going to make a difference. Thank you all so much. We will see you next week.